was in the military service and he was liberated earlier. So he went back and he was of course happy to see us and we were happy to see him. He survived. My other uncle and my father did not survive, they didn't come back. This is my father's side. My father was the oldest of 3 boys. And my mother's side, my mother was the youngest of 4 girls. And one of her older sister lived in England, so she was out of the reach with her daughter, out of the reach of the Germans. But the other 2 sisters and the whole family, nobody survived from that. They lived in Bratislava, in Czechoslovakia at that time. And they were deported much earlier. That was not Hungary. Yes.
You were 10 when you were liberated. Did you have family with you in the camp, or were you by yourself? When you were liberated, were you with family at that time in the camp?
My mother, my grandfather and me were together and stayed together all through, which was very lucky too. We also were lucky because the labor camp in Austria called Neudorf was not too far from Wiener Neustadt. And my mother was born, no actually, my mother was born in Bratislava. My mother grew up in Vienna, which was about 45 miles from the labor camp. So she not only spoke German, but she spoke German with the same accent. She was familiar with the fairy tales, the children's stories, the schooling, the whole system. So she was not really a stranger. She could communicate with the people on their level. And the local people, this is 1944, end of summer 44 and on. By that time, it was understood that Germany is not going to win the war. The big battles of Stalingrad, Leningrad, Moscow were all over. The Germans were beaten there. The Germans were already pushed out from all Russia. They were still in Ukraine and Poland, but not in Russia. And the attitude of the local people who were enthusiastic supporters of Hitler at the beginning realized that what they were betting on was not the right bet, because they were in miserable life during the war. They had shortage of everything. So their attitude towards us was quite different. Partly because my mother could talk to them at the language that they are used to, partly because they learned what Hitler meant to them. And my mother was a maid at a high-ranking Nazi official who treated her very, very nicely. Not all Nazis were bad. That's interesting to know also, because the image...
It's very interesting that you say that.
Yeah. And I tell that to the school children when I talk to them, because the individual action is in their control. How good they do.
I have a friend who was born in a concentration camp with a Polish Jewish mother and an Austrian guard. And his father helped his mother and him escape from the camp.
Where was that, do you know?
I'll find out from he's out of town now traveling, but it's very interesting. And on his birth certificate was a swastika.
Huh.
And he waited, when his mother passed away, he waited to take her to he couldn't get her back to Europe. He was living here. So he had her cremated and then took her back to some cemetery in Poland where there's a lot of survivors, and not surviving, the people that didn't survive, buried.
Were buried there.
Yeah, so what she could be back was her family.
Very interesting.
So when you said that not all Nazis were
Not
bad.
all Nazis were bad. I met several of them that were very, very nice, especially for us kids. We were 3 kids in the camp, by the way. Out of the 35 people, 3 kids. I was the oldest kid. Agnes was 1 year younger, and Peter was 2 years younger than me. Agnes survived, Peter died in the camp. You wanted to ask something, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious. You still have a heavy accent. You were 10 when the camps were liberated. And I'm asking you this because I was born in Germany, and I was raised in a family, everybody had an accent. All the aunts, the uncles, everybody spoke with an accent. And yet your use of language is excellent, and you speak beautifully, which is so different than my parents, my aunts, uncles, relatives. They would never be able to sit right there the way you just spoke so eloquently. So I'm curious, you were 10, and so you were younger when it was liberated in 45 than they were. They were like in their 20s at the liberation. What happened?
I'm sorry, they were younger than me.
No, you're younger than them.
No. I was the oldest of the 3 of us.
No, I'm sorry. When I
Oh,
say
okay,
them,
I
mean
got it.
parents.
Sorry,
Not
now I
parents.
understand what you
Yeah,
said.
I'm sorry, I didn't say it clearly.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm sitting here like so impressed how incredibly articulate you are and how incredibly knowledgeable you are in the use of the English language. However, you were younger when you got out of the camps than they were. What happened after you were 10 though? When did you come to America? How is it that you speak so beautifully and yet you still have a heavy accent, which I find so interesting?
Everybody has an accent but me.
That's what my mother used to say.
When I went back to Hungary, I lost 1 year of school because in 1944, before the German occupation, the Hungarian government was pretty anti-Semitic. Actually, Germany could learn from Hungary about anti-Semitic because the anti-Jewish laws were already there in the 1920s, not in the 1930s. In 1920 there was a law which was called the Latin name was numerus clausus. That means only 6% of the university population could be Jewish. That changed later to numerus nullus. That means no Jew was allowed at the university. This was before Hitler came into power. And there were other anti-Semitic laws already on the books there and practiced too. It's not enough just to have it on the books, it has to be practiced also. So I lost a year. I was then not just university but high school. There were Jewish kids were kicked out of the high school, and later on Jewish kids were kicked out of the grade school, elementary school. And I was in 2nd grade. And all my other buddies there said how good it is, how lucky he is, he doesn't have to study, he can play and so on. But I liked school. I really did. I don't think it was that great. But I lost a year because of that. And then when we got back into Hungary, Hungary was under Russian occupation. And it became a communist country. And I cut up with 1 year, and then I finished school and finished high school there in Hungary. And coming to the question what you asked, 1956 there was a revolution against that. I was still there. I was in that revolution there in 1956. There was a chance to escape. And I was living in Budapest, working as a tool and die maker apprentice. And as I mentioned, we lived in a small village, well, not so small village, 10,000 people, in a primitive southeastern part of the country. And I went there and to see my mother and stepfather, and my mother said, "My son, you came to the wrong direction, this is east. You have to go west, not east." So that's when I decided to go west, and ended up first in Vienna, Austria, end of 1956. And from Austria I went to Montreal with a student group. And that is another story altogether. Can
So when did you
spend.
come to America?
Well, I lived in Montreal in Canada for 11 years, and in 1968 I moved to the US. I learned English on the street in Montreal, which was half French and half English. And went to school, finished, got my degree, and get a job. And then I get a better job in the US and managed to get over here in 1968. Go ahead.
When you were in the labor camp, what do you remember knowing about what else was going on? About the other camps, about the German occupation?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Very, very little. We knew that it's bad. We didn't know how bad until years after liberation. When people started to come back from Auschwitz and Dachau and other people, and they started to talk about their experience, we didn't know how lucky really we were. Yes.
In your little remote area, did you experience Kristallnacht and the Nuremberg laws and wearing the Jewish star? And
Wearing the Jewish star, not to be able to go on the street, but that was even before Hitler came in.